afternoon, everyone. Welcome to iCAAD Insights. My name is Minta Johnson and I work with iCAAD. iCAAD is a platform dedicated to expanding knowledge, exchanging ideas, advancing well-being, as well as looking at the prevention and treatment of behavioural, mental and emotional health issues. We facilitate open dialogue and learning, and we do this through our communications network, which consists of online resources, including articles written by prominent professionals within the mental health and addictions fields. You can find out more about iCAAD at www.icaad.com. Today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Philip Weeks onto iCAAD Insights. Hi, Philip.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. I'm just going to introduce you quickly. So, Philip is one of the leading natural health experts in the UK. He is a master herbalist, licensed acupuncturist, and nutritional therapist. And I believe that your skill lies in your innovative approach in combining ancient medicine with functional medicine and diagnostic techniques. He's also one of the few practitioners and teachers of the master tongue acupuncture system. Is that right, Philip?
Right, that's right.
I think for our audience to start with, I think if you could just talk about or tell me about a bit about what functional medicine is, because I'm sure many people haven't heard the term perhaps.
Well, certainly how I practice it and how I see it is when we think of how we liaise with medical doctors, often there will be a physical diagnosis for something. So say somebody may have a skin complaint such as eczema, and that will be the diagnosis. Eczema will be the diagnosis, and therefore the approach with that will be normally in a medical framework, well, okay, what may be causing that eczema, but primarily they'll be identified as having eczema, and then they'll be given certain medications or strategies in that particular diagnosis. I think how I practice functional medicine is really this idea that beneath that process, other things are going on. So although somebody may have a diagnosis of eczema, what is underneath that diagnosis? Is it related to an imbalance regarding their gut bacteria? Is it a nutritional deficiency? Is it an allergy to something externally? Is it some historic toxin exposure? So with functional medicine, we are obviously we consider the diagnosis, but we're looking at the underlying mechanisms. What is happening underneath within a person, which may exhibit itself in different ways? So this is a little bit different than, for example, how certain types of Western medicine may be practiced. So the beauty of Western medicine is that it's very, very good to certain kinds of severe conditions. You know, if somebody's had a car accident and they've had a severe injury, then they need to put it back together. Their leg might need to be put into the right place, all of that kind of thing. So we know that Western medicine has a very important role. However, with that, what can happen with Western medicine is that somebody might have a multiple situation of a number of different complaints. So, for example, they might have psoriasis, they might have eczema, they might have asthma, they might have irritable bowel, they might have migraines, they might have hormonal imbalances. So, where Western medicine has given us the idea of the magic bullet, really, is that if somebody's got malaria, then Western medicine can give you a disease for the malaria. So, there's one approach for that, and that's where it's very, very good. However, most of the people I see will have multiple conditions. They might have asthma and eczema, and they might have depression, and they might have migraines, and they might have a number of things. So if you apply the same method for emergency medicine, so giving one drug or a number of drugs for each condition, then people will walk away from that encounter with many, many different drugs. They might have inhalers for the asthma, they might have drugs for the irritable bowel, they might have creams for the eczema, they might have painkillers for migraines. So we're getting then in a situation where there are multiple interventions going on, and we have no idea how all those medical drugs will combine and what side effects that might create and what kind of other conditions that might cause. In functional medicine, ancient medicine, we aim to look at the connections between all of these conditions. So I might see that there is in fact a link between the irritable bowel and the asthma and the eczema and the depression and the migraines. And what is it that is connecting all of those things, and how do we address that? So certainly that's how I look at medicine, that Western medicine is fantastic for like emergency medicine, but with chronic long-term conditions, we need to look at the body as a whole and address that in a very, very different way.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. And how, though, can you find the link? What do you do to find that link?
Yeah, so there's multiple links. So in classical Chinese medicine, these links have already been observed. So it's a different kind of scientific method. So most of the medicine was developed through observational science, so seeing the links uncertain. The links are known in regular Western medicine as well. We know there can be links between different conditions. So somebody, for example, might have eczema when they're born, then they're given steroid creams for the eczema, and then later on they'll also develop asthma as well. Now in Chinese medicine, the skin, the same organ in a sense. There is a resonance between the skin and lungs. It makes sense to us that if there's one conditioning going on in one area of the body, it will express itself in another. So I suppose that holistic paradigm, which Western medicine and functional medicine, all these different conditions are well aware of, that everything is connected, and we can't expect wellness from looking at one area of the body. We need to attend, humans are complicated, we're complicated things, and we need multiple, we need to look at things in a multifactorial way. And with classical Chinese medicine, these other medical systems, there are links. We can see those, and there's all kinds of diagnostic methods that we use to see those links. So we try and get to the cause of what it's all about. So although somebody might have multiple conditions, it might mean there's only one intervention that's needed. It might mean they only need one particular intervention in order for everything to ultimately improve.
Okay, well that's, and would you test to find out what that intervention would be? You would do various diagnostic tests to find that out.
So I suppose the whole encounter with a patient will give a clue to what might be going on. And sometimes patients know as well. Sometimes patients are very, very aware. They'll just, I was fine until this point, and then something happened. And since that time, I've not been well, or since that time, something's happened. And so often patients are aware that something occurred, that something happened at a certain time. And then it's for me to, and practitioners like me to like a detective, go into that. Or what is that about? And that might involve blood testing and gut testing and testing for people's neurotransmitters. But fundamentally, it's really exploring with patients kind of when it occurred, because there's multiple levels. So for example, in classical Chinese medicine, the idea of trauma has been a major part of the kind of medical practice for thousands of years. So we know that trauma can have a very, very profound impact on the way that people's bodies function, how our psyche interacts with the world and ourselves, and trauma. But when trauma occurred, can have different impacts on us. So in this kind of medical system, there's in Chinese medicine, there's this idea of the cycle of 7 and 8. So there's this idea that there's a cycle of every 7 to 8 years, 7.5 years. And if trauma occurs, for example, before 7 years old, then that has a very, very different impact physiologically than if trauma happened later on. So if trauma's occurred, and that may be all kinds of trauma, physical, emotional, of any kind, mental, whatever trauma, and that would be a big conversation what trauma is, but loosely speaking, trauma, then before 7 years old, then that trauma will be more part of somebody's inherent psychological, emotional, physical architecture than if it happens later on than that. Okay, so it's understood that in this medicine that trauma, that obviously certain difficult experiences can be very helpful for us as human beings. We grow, we grow by challenging ourselves. We grow by trying new things, learning new things. This is all part of how we develop and grow. And there's a lot of talk about resilience. How do we develop resilience? Well, a lot of that, for example, might be challenging ourselves and doing things that we've never done before in order to understand, well, actually, I can change and I can be better and different and things can happen. But it does depend on when that occurs. So if that occurs before that cycle of 7 and 8, then that becomes very much part of somebody's physical architecture of their body, and I would address that therapeutically in a very, very different way. It's understood that in Chinese medicine that might not be addressed through verbal communication. It might be so inherent in the template of an individual that there are techniques that have been used since 2,000 years ago, and even in the text called the Neijing or the Suwen, it explains how we deal with those things. And that is a very, very different thing. So resilience is important. We need to kind of challenge ourselves as adults. But if those instances have occurred before 7 and 8, then there are different approaches that we would support somebody with in order to integrate and transform from those particular experiences.
Okay, and I think, have you ever had clients that have, if you experience trauma before 7 and 8, some people might not even, as you say, what do you define as trauma? They might be presenting to you with a lot of symptoms and have actually experienced trauma before the age of 7, but they wouldn't name it as trauma or wouldn't remember it as trauma, or does that happen? And then are you able to be the detective and pinpoint that with the work?
All the time. So all of us have experienced things that have been upsetting at various different levels. But if the upset is caused in the Neijing, they talk about this idea of time-space freezing. So what occurs is that when something very, very dramatic happens, that obviously is subjective. Not about an objective experience, it's about a subjective experience, that time and space freezes in the body. So when time and space freezes in the body, there is a holding pattern that is held somatically in the body that has to be released. Now, what's interesting, when that's released, then often then behavior change can occur without people consciously having to make behavioral change. So it might be, and I do that through acupuncture. So it might be people, I want to change, I want to be different, and they're trying, and we're all trying. But actually, when that space-time freezing changes, then it can be a spontaneous change. It's not something that's done cognitively. People experience their life differently, and they will then naturally make changes that are based on having more of who they are. And if you've got more of who you are in your space, then changes can occur, often without consciously having to think about them.
I mean, I find it fascinating that these techniques and these ways of treating people have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they are still as efficient and they work as well today.
Thousands of years. So text is 2,000 years old, and we still use it. And in fact, I still refer to these texts because there are clues in that on how to deal. Trauma is nothing new. As humans, we have dealt with trauma in all kinds of different ways. It might be true to say that the traumas that occur now might be quicker than previously. So, just going a trip to London. I mean, I know patients in my rural practice who never travel anywhere. They've been here for 7, 8 years. They've never traveled anywhere. Their lives are kind of much slower. Their experience, but now much more quickly, we're hearing news that we would never have normally heard. So we haven't really caught up with where the world is now. And what's interesting is that when you have these holding patterns in the body, then there is more likely to be what we call toxin sequestration. So if you're exposed to chemical toxins in the environment or in your food, then the body will store those toxic, that bioaccumulation of toxins, often in the tissues where there isn't any, where there isn't this sort of breath motion going on. So what then happens in the body is that we hold physical, emotional trauma, but then we also hold the toxicity there as well. So as we release toxicity, then often we will release the emotions in that area at the same time. And often they come together. Often they come together in the body.
Wow. So, I mean, so people presenting them with, who are in early stages of recovery from addiction, for example, who have perhaps experienced a childhood trauma that has then led to holding all of this energy in the body, which has then led to them trying to get rid of it by external ways and means such as drugs, I suppose. Then the toxins that they will have been ingesting from the drugs will be held in the same place as the toxins, or whatever you call it, the energy from the trauma, and will be eroding them from the inside, essentially.
Yeah, so there's a holding pattern that occurs in the tissues, and what we found is that absolutely that holding pattern means that that's where all the ironical toxins, because there isn't movement going on, the body will always store things where there isn't so much movement, because it's a safer place to store it. So because there isn't any movement, that's where it all gets stored. So, and then with that, you see, that uses up our reserves, and so often what I see with patients as well is that there can be what I term nutritional deficiency dysphoria. So as well as holding all these patterns, that takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of energy for us to hold things in place. And that's emotional energy, mental energy, but also physical energy. And that uses up reserves. So, and as we become depleted in our nutrient reserves, then we're less able to self-regulate. And that's the issue. Life is already challenging for all of us anyway, in many different ways. And we're then unable to self-regulate. So with all of these things that have occurred, whether it's traumas or toxins, then and lack of nutrients, we're less likely to self-regulate. And if we're less able to self-regulate, then we will be looking more and more to external means in order to feel like we can regulate ourselves and feel normal, or whatever we may be feeling. So we can release the potential, more of the potential in the body by helping our body dealing with these holding patterns. And then by addressing nutrient deficiencies, then the body is more likely to self-regulate. Because obviously without enough nutrients, we can't produce the brain chemicals, the neurotransmitters, GABA, and all of these different kind of important, serotonin. That doesn't happen in our body in the way that it could do when these so these holding patterns have to be able to be released in many different ways in order for us to have the ability to self-regulate.
So we need these nutrients from nutrient-dense foods, then, I'm assuming, or perhaps supplements if we need them, sort of a boost of them, in order for our brains to function. Because, I mean, we discussed about, perhaps presenting with eczema or something, but say someone's presenting to you with emotional difficulties, like, or mental difficulties, like difficulties that perhaps they feel come from the brain, but maybe they don't, maybe they're part of the gut. This is the question, I suppose. But how important is the food that we eat in fixing that then?
In a sense, we can't release what we need to release. We can't process what we need to process unless we've got the actual building blocks, the actual ingredients to do that. So, in essence, we have to have these nutrients in place for us to have emotional resilience. So an emotional resilience, a mental resilience, and physical resilience can often stem from what we are eating. And I don't believe we're able to regulate ourselves emotionally and mentally and to live fulfilling and meaningful lives if we don't have the basis for what our body actually needs, because the body will be anxious. We get anxious when we don't have the nutrient we need, because the body goes, you can't rest, because without this nutrient, you're not going to live. So therefore, I don't want you to rest. I don't want you to sit. I want you to go and find that food. And so we go and find the food. Often we aren't able to find the actual food that's going to do the actual, going to fulfill what we need. So we were unable to feel at ease if we don't have all the nutrients we need. We can't produce, if you think 95% of the serotonin is produced in our gut, if our gut bacteria is out of balance, then we're not going to be utilizing what we need from a neurotransmitter point of view. So absolutely, the foundation, even in Chinese medicine, the first thing you do is you attend to the nutritional needs of the physical body. And once that happens, the body can then go, I've got what I need. And then once it knows it's got what it needs, then there is a relaxation that can go on in the nervous system, and that then we can start processing all of the other things that have occurred. But that won't happen fully until we have all our nutritional needs. And that's the first step, I believe, in any kind of foundational program for people's health.
So why does our body or mind sometimes tell us that we need, sugar or sugary foods, and which is obviously not what we need? We probably need something else, like something with proper nutrients. But when our body says, I'm hungry, I need carbs, or I need something to fulfill me, why is that wrong? Why is it doing that?
It's curious, isn't it? So, for example, with extreme anemia, people will crave ice cubes. Okay, so if you're profoundly anemic, and I've had women in my practice profoundly anemic, and they go, why do I crave ice cubes? And I have one patient who was referred to a psychiatrist saying that it's some kind of mental disorder. She's wanting to eat ice cubes, and it was simply anemia. So it's, as those nutrient deficiencies go down, the brain cannot tell you clearly what it's needing, because that is, it hasn't got what it needs. The computer starts to go wrong. So this is the irony, is that the more imbalanced we become, the more we crave things that make us even worse. So yeah, like you said, if we've got issues with our blood sugars, we can't regulate our blood sugars, which is common for most of us, to be honest. Most of us have difficulty in regulating our blood sugars if we don't eat really well. Then we'll start craving more sugar, which will make us worse. That will then give us type 2 diabetes. That will then, so that's why we have our inner wisdom, but sometimes we have to go through to kind of ancient wisdom. So that's why I go to ancient wisdom, because people have found these strategies for thousands of years to survive and thrive and be well. And there's wisdom. So sometimes, although the wisdom ultimately is within us, that can get distorted the more out of balance we become.
Okay, and I've been holding on to this question that I've had since you mentioned that the trauma is obviously stored in our body, which I was aware of. And then the toxins from the food or that we eat, or whatever toxins we might put in our body, is stored in the same place. Now, if the body is such a brilliant machine, which it is, obviously it is, why would it store? Because obviously it stores, I understand why it stores fat, because in the olden days especially, we needed that to survive in the long winters and all the rest of it. Perhaps, obviously, as life has changed, that's not the case now. But why would it store damaging stuff in the body? Why doesn't it just expel it?
Because the process of expelling can be more dangerous than storing it.
Okay. What, for trauma and toxins?
Yes. So, for example, you can see it from a biochemical point of view. There's certain substances that, whilst they're getting detoxified, actually become temporarily more toxic. So there are some substances that we ingest. So for example, like paracetamol. So if we ingest paracetamol, as it's been detoxed, there is a point which I'll talk in my lecture about how toxins are actually broken down in the body. That whole process is very, very interesting, because it lets us understand why this is the case. There is a time when the toxin is, as it's being processed and deconjugated and actually detoxified, will become temporarily more dangerous because of the free radicals. So the body will make a decision. a biochemical decision, but it's still a decision, that it's better to store it away, put it into the fat, put it in the somewhere else, rather than the risk of processing that chemical or that toxin. And by doing that, it's actually preventing us from having more illness. Because when certain stress hormones are very, very high, cortisol, adrenaline, and various other things, the body won't go into detoxification mode. If we are in constant fight and flight, we won't detoxify properly, because it understands there is not the reserves and the time to do that. Now, if we've spent a lot of our time in fight and flight, then we will have an accumulation of toxicity on many levels that has to be unwound. So the typical scenario is people are at work and they're fine, and then they go on holiday and they're ill, right? So we know that's happened to many people. So they're fine at work, and then they have a holiday. They're like, "Oh, I've been ill for 2 weeks. I'm in the flu," and then they just recover, already going to go back to work. And the reason that is, as the adrenaline and the cortisol goes down, the body goes, right, I can repair, I can chuck out this stuff, I can do repair work, I can do things. And in order to do that, we sometimes have to be ill. So that's one way of looking at that whole dynamic. So the body is constantly trying to save us. It sometimes gives us these conditions to actually save our life. But in order to unwind all that, we have to give it the opportunity to resolve many of these things that have occurred during our lifetime.
Okay, well, that's really definitely helped, that explanation, and I really understand it now 100%. And so finally, for my last sort of question for you, I just wanted to know, what would you say was the most important thing for someone to do? If they could make one change, if you could say to someone, you have to just make one change now in your life to start yourself on the journey of feeling better or getting on that wellness journey, what would the change be?
Well, if I go back to the classics, so there is a Ayurvedic text, again, 2,000 years old, Charaka, and he would talk about the first step is the illness and of any kind, or emotional distress, or the ability to cope, or whatever on any other level, is a form of it's like a storm in the body. It's like we've just had storms recently. And it's like that. There is a storm. There is chaos. So chaos is occurring in the body. So to help us deal with chaos, the first thing is routine. Routine is the foundation of everything. So routine might look like going to bed at the same time every day, getting up at the same time every day. It's the boring stuff. We want the new sexy supplement that's going to make us well, but actually the foundation of health is routine. Eating at the same time every day and all of that. So it's boring, it's not glamorous, it's a hard sell for people, but the first thing is routine. Eating on time, getting to bed on time, and creating a routine first. And that's the first foundation of any kind of health change, is that we need to regulate that first.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And I think I've heard it, someone, I can't remember who said it, but they said, the mark of any great leader or something is someone who makes their bed every morning. Just doing that, making sure you make your bed every morning sets you up. It's the same thing you do every day. You make sure you do it. And I think, in my opinion as well, routine has definitely been something that has been a massive beneficial factor in my sort of wellness and well-being, I think. And you see it with children as well. You can take a kid who is always happy-go-lucky at home, you take them on holiday, and all of a sudden they're having meltdowns all over the place because they're going to bed at the wrong time, they're eating at different times, and everything is out of whack for them.
Yeah, and we see it with kids, right? So with my kids, if you don't have not eating on time, time for bed, if that all goes out the window, then absolutely they can't regulate their mood. They can't regulate what they want. They want things that, it's like they become more unreasonable. We're the same. Like, we become unreasonable. Our kind of internal dialogue will become more unreasonable. And that's the first foundation. So yeah, routine, and then absolutely, there's dietary strategies, there's things we can do to detox that are easy, there's things that we can put in place that will make everything else that we do more effective in getting to a place where we are our best self. And because that's it, it's about being our best self on whatever that may be for an individual.
Thank you so much, Philip.
Thank you.
My name is Araminta Johnson, and you have just joined me at the most recent iCAAD iTalks. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you and my guests here today. If you'd like to access any other resources, you can do so at www.icaad.com. Thank you, and see you all soon.